I woke up that cold October morning with nothing but the clothes on my back and a cheap plastic bag in my hand. My son had kicked me out the night before, slammed the door behind me like I was some unwanted stranger. The next morning, my credit card stopped working. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 73 years old, I thought I understood what family meant. I thought love was unconditional, that the sacrifices I had made for my son David would be remembered with gratitude, not resentment. I was wrong about so many things, but I was right about one thing that would save my life. I was worth more than they were willing to give me. Let me take you back to that morning in Queens, New York, when my world crumbled, and then, slowly, began to rebuild itself into something I never imagined possible. The apartment on 37th Avenue had been my prison for 3 years. That's how long I had been living with David, his wife Jennifer, and their 2 children, Emma and Michael. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the cramped living room, where I had been sleeping on a pull-out couch that creaked with every movement. The smell of instant coffee mixed with the mustiness of old upholstery filled the air. I could hear the children getting ready for school in the next room, their voices muffled by walls too thin to contain the tension that had been building in this place. My daily routine had become a choreography of exhaustion. I would wake before dawn, fold away my bedding so the living room could return to its daytime purpose, and begin preparing breakfast for everyone. My arthritic hands moved slowly as I cracked eggs and buttered toast, each movement a small act of service I hoped would earn me a smile, a thank you, anything to remind me that I belonged here. "Mom, the kids need their lunch money," David would say without looking up from his phone, his voice carrying the weight of obligation rather than affection. I would reach into my purse, always my purse, and hand over $20 that I could barely afford. Jennifer would rush past me to grab her coffee, barely acknowledging my presence except to mention that the laundry needed folding or that I had left a dish in the sink. The children, my grandchildren, had grown distant too. Emma, now 16, would roll her eyes when I tried to help with homework. Michael, 13, seemed embarrassed to introduce me to his friends as anything more than my dad's mom who stays with us. I had become invisible in plain sight, a ghost in the home where I had hoped to find refuge after losing my apartment due to rising rent prices. But it was the small moments that cut deepest. The family photos hung throughout the apartment, chronicling birthdays, holidays, and milestones, all taken after I had moved in, and yet I appeared in none of them. It was as if they had collectively decided to edit me out of their story, to pretend that my presence was temporary even as months turned to years. That October evening, everything changed with a single text message. I was washing dishes after dinner, the warm, soapy water soothing my aching joints, when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was from my old friend Ruth, who lived in Florida now. "Happy birthday, Margaret. Hope you're having a wonderful day surrounded by family love." My birthday. October 15th. I had forgotten my own birthday, and apparently, so had everyone else in this house. 73 years old, and not even a card from the people I had sacrificed everything for. I dried my hands slowly, the dish towel trembling in my grip. The silence in the apartment felt heavy, suffocating. In the next room, I could hear David and Jennifer discussing weekend plans, their voices animated with excitement about places I would not be invited to go. I walked to my small suitcase in the closet, where I kept my most precious belongings. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a photograph from Central Park. David must have been 8 years old, grinning gap-toothed in his Yankees jacket while I held his hand and pointed toward the carousel. His father had taken the picture just months before the accident that would leave me a widow at 35, struggling to raise David alone while working 2 jobs and attending night school to become a certified nursing assistant. Looking at that photograph, I could almost smell the hot dogs from the vendor nearby, feel the crisp autumn air that day when David had begged to ride the carousel one more time. "Please, Mom, just once more," he had said. And I had said yes, the way I always said yes, even when money was tight and time was short. Love meant saying yes. Love meant sacrifice. Love meant giving until you had nothing left to give, and then finding a way to give more. But sitting there on that October evening, I began to wonder if love was supposed to be so one-sided. If the child who had once begged for one more carousel ride could grow into a man who forgot his mother's birthday while she washed his family's dishes and paid for his children's lunch money with her Social Security check. The confrontation, when it came, was swift and brutal. I had asked David about my missing pain medication. The prescription I needed for my arthritis had disappeared from the kitchen counter where I always kept it. "Where are my pills?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. David's face hardened. "We had to sell them," he said matter-of-factly. "Jennifer lost her job last week, and we needed the money for rent." The words hit me like a physical blow. My medication, the one thing that made it possible for me to function each day, sold like some commodity to pay their bills. "Those were prescribed for me," I whispered. "I need them." You need to understand that we're all struggling here," Jennifer chimed in from the kitchen doorway. "We can't afford to support everyone's needs." Support everyone's needs. As if I hadn't been paying for groceries with my Social Security checks. As if I hadn't been watching their children for free every day after school. As if the $1,000 I had given them last month for emergency car repairs hadn't been used to pay for their weekend getaway while I stayed home with the kids. "I want to see the receipts," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Receipts? Mom, you're not exactly in a position to make demands here." That night, I made the mistake of pressing the issue. I showed them the bank statement I had printed that afternoon, the one that revealed how much money I had been giving them over the past 3 years. Nearly $30,000 of my savings, gone. Money I had earned working double shifts at the nursing home, money I had saved penny by penny for my old age, for emergencies, for dignity. "This has to stop," I said, holding the paper with shaking hands. "I need to keep something for myself." The fight that followed was ugly. David accused me of being selfish, of not understanding the pressures of raising children in New York City. Jennifer spoke of sacrifice and family obligation, turning my own words against me like weapons. The children watched from the hallway, their faces a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. "If you can't appreciate what we're doing for you," David said finally, his voice cold and final, "then maybe you should find somewhere else to live." I stared at him, this man I had raised from a frightened 8-year-old to a seemingly successful adult, and I saw a stranger looking back at me. "You're kicking me out?" "I'm giving you a choice," he replied. "Either you stop making demands and be grateful for what you have, or you figure out another arrangement." That night, I packed my belongings into 2 small suitcases and a plastic shopping bag. 40 years of memories, reduced to what I could carry. As I folded my clothes, I kept thinking about that carousel in Central Park, about the little boy who had needed one more ride. What had happened to that child? When had love become a transaction, payable only in silence and submission? David didn't help me pack. Neither did Jennifer. The children hugged me goodbye awkwardly, probably confused about why Grandma was leaving in the middle of the night with her suitcases. Emma whispered, "I love you," in my ear, and for a moment I thought about staying, about apologizing for standing up for myself, about accepting the role they had assigned me. But then I remembered my medication being sold, my bank account being drained, my birthday being forgotten. Love, I realized, shouldn't cost everything you have to give. The homeless shelter on Northern Boulevard smelled like disinfectant and despair. I had never imagined I would end up in such a place, but there I was at 73 years old, clutching my plastic bag of belongings and trying not to cry in front of the intake worker who looked young enough to be my granddaughter. "First time?" she asked gently, and I nodded, unable to speak. The shame was overwhelming. How do you explain that your own son put you on the street? How do you admit that the family you sacrificed everything for had discarded you like trash? That first night in the shelter was the longest of my life. The cot was thin and lumpy, the room filled with the sounds of other women's sorrows, snores, sobs, whispered prayers in languages I didn't recognize. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was how my story would end, if the obituary would read, "Margaret Walsh, survived by son David," without mentioning that he had kicked her out of his home. But morning came, as morning always does, and with it came a decision that would change everything. I would not let this be the end of my story. I would not let their abandonment define my worth. I was more than their convenience, more than their emergency fund, more than their unpaid babysitter and housekeeper. The shelter provided me with resources I didn't know existed. A social worker named Carmen helped me apply for emergency housing assistance. A volunteer lawyer helped me understand my rights as a tenant, even in my son's apartment. Most importantly, they connected me with other women who had similar stories, women whose families had exploited their love and then discarded them when standing up for themselves became inconvenient. I learned that what had happened to me had a name: elder financial abuse. I learned that 1 in 10 seniors experiences some form of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, often at the hands of family members. I learned that shame and isolation are the tools abusers use to keep their victims silent, and that speaking out is the first step toward freedom. Within a week, I had been placed in transitional housing, a small studio apartment in Flushing that was mine alone. The rent was subsidized based on my income, and for the first time in 3 years, I had my own key, my own space, my own rules. The apartment was sparse but clean, with a small kitchenette and a window that faced east toward the rising sun. The first morning in my new home, I made coffee in my own cup, one of the few possessions I had managed to take with me. I sat by the window and watched the sun come up over Queens, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in years, the silence around me felt peaceful rather than oppressive. No one was going to ask me for money. No one was going to demand that I cook breakfast or fold laundry or watch children who barely acknowledged my presence. I cried that morning, but they were cleansing tears, the kind that wash away years of accumulated hurt and disappointment. I cried for the grandmother I had tried to be, for the mother I had always been, for the woman who had forgotten her own worth somewhere between sacrifice and slavery. During my second week of independence, David called. I saw his name on my phone and felt my heart race, partly from hope and partly from fear. Maybe he had realized his mistake. Maybe he wanted to apologize, to bring me home, to acknowledge that what they had done was wrong. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." I waited, hoping for an apology, for recognition of the pain he had caused. "Jennifer's pregnant again," he continued. "We're going to need help with childcare, and we figured you could move back in. We'll need you to contribute to the household expenses, of course, but we can give you the basement room instead of the couch." The basement room. Damp, windowless, more suitable for storage than human habitation. And still the expectation that I would pay for the privilege of serving their needs while being hidden away like a shameful secret. "No," I said, surprised by how easily the word came. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, David. I won't be coming back. I won't be paying your expenses or watching your children or sleeping in your basement. I'm done." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to wonder if he had hung up. Finally, he spoke again, his voice harder now. "You're making a mistake, Mom. We're your family." "Family doesn't abandon each other on the street," I replied. "Family doesn't steal medication or drain bank accounts or forget birthdays. Family doesn't treat love like a business transaction." He hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, I discovered that my credit cards had been canceled. All of them. The cards that were in my name, linked to my accounts, but which David had somehow managed to freeze or close. When I called the bank, I was told that a family member had reported the cards stolen, claiming I was suffering from dementia and was no longer competent to manage my finances. The betrayal was breathtaking in its cruelty. Not content with kicking me out, David was now trying to destroy my financial independence, to force me back under his control by making it impossible for me to survive on my own. It was a level of manipulation I hadn't imagined possible, even from him. But David had underestimated his mother. 40 years of working in healthcare had taught me about advocacy and documentation. I had copies of everything: bank statements, medical records, even recordings on my phone of our conversations about money. Within days, I had not only restored my credit cards, but also filed a report with Adult Protective Services about the financial abuse I had endured. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of what had been done to me. Over 3 years, David and Jennifer had taken nearly $40,000 from my accounts through a combination of direct requests for money, unauthorized use of my debit card, and forged checks. They had been charging household expenses to my credit cards and making minimum payments with my Social Security checks, leaving me responsible for growing debt I hadn't even known existed. My lawyer, appointed through legal aid services, explained that elder financial abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, often perpetrated by people the victim loves and trusts most. Adult children who see their aging parents as ATM machines rather than human beings deserving of respect and care. The good news, she told me, is that you have excellent documentation, and New York State takes these cases seriously. The bad news is that prosecuting family members is emotionally devastating, even when they deserve it. I thought about that conversation as I sat in my small apartment, weighing my options. I could pursue criminal charges against David and Jennifer. I could demand restitution for the money they had stolen. I could make their crime public, force them to face the consequences of their actions. Or I could choose something different, something that might hurt less but heal more. I chose healing. Instead of prosecution, I chose complete separation. I changed my phone number and didn't give it to David. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution and set up all new credit cards with fraud monitoring. I made it clear through my lawyer that any attempt to contact me or access my finances would result in immediate legal action. Most importantly, I began to build a new life, one based on my own choices rather than other people's expectations. The first friend I made in Flushing was Mrs. Elena Alvarez, who lived in the apartment next door. Elena was 78 years old, a widow from Cuba who had raised 5 children and was now dealing with her own family struggles. Her youngest son had been asking her to co-sign loans she couldn't afford, and her daughter-in-law made snide comments about the smell of Elena's cooking. We bonded over afternoon coffee and stories of ungrateful children. Elena made the most incredible Cuban coffee, strong and sweet, served in tiny cups that she handled with hands weathered by decades of hard work. We would sit in her kitchen, surrounded by the warmth of garlic and cumin from whatever dish she was preparing, and talk about the children we had raised and the strangers they had become. In Cuba, Elena told me one afternoon, we have a saying, "El que no tiene de Congo, tiene de Carabali." It means everyone has something in their background to be proud of, some struggle they've overcome. Your dignity, Margaret, is not determined by how your son treats you. It's determined by how you treat yourself. Elena's wisdom became a lifeline during those first months of independence. She taught me that loneliness and solitude are different things. Loneliness is the ache of being unwanted, while solitude is the peace of being enough for yourself. She showed me how to cook simple meals that tasted of home rather than obligation. Most importantly, she demonstrated that friendship between women who have survived hardship can be deeper and more sustaining than family relationships based on duty and expectation. Through Elena, I met other women in our building and the surrounding neighborhood. Maria, who cleaned office buildings at night and sent money to grandchildren in El Salvador, whom she hadn't seen in 15 years. Rose, whose adult son lived in her basement but contributed nothing to household expenses while she worked part-time at a grocery store to make ends meet. Janet, whose daughter had power of attorney and was slowly selling off her mother's possessions while promising that the money was being saved for her care. Each of these women had a variation of my story. Love exploited, trust betrayed, dignity trampled by people who were supposed to protect it. But each of them was also surviving, finding ways to create meaning and joy despite their family's failures. We formed an informal support group, meeting every Thursday evening in the community room of our building. We called ourselves Las Segundas, the second acts, because we were all writing new chapters in our lives after the first ones had ended in disappointment. During one of our meetings, Janet shared something that changed my perspective forever. She had been crying about her daughter's latest betrayal, selling Janet's mother's jewelry without permission, when she stopped mid-sentence and looked around the room. "You know what?" she said, wiping her eyes. "My daughter doesn't deserve my tears anymore. These tears belong to me now, and I'm going to use them for something better." Janet was right. Our grief over our family's treatment needed to transform into something more productive than endless sorrow. We needed to reclaim not just our financial independence, but our emotional autonomy as well. I started attending therapy sessions at the senior center, where a counselor named Dr. Patricia Williams guided me through the complex emotions of family estrangement. Dr. Williams specialized in elder abuse cases and helped me understand that my experience was both common and traumatic. Emotional abuse by adult children often goes unreported because the victims blame themselves, she explained during one of our sessions. "You were programmed from birth to believe that good mothers sacrifice everything for their children, and that setting boundaries means you've failed in that role." Through therapy, I learned that the guilt I felt about cutting off contact with David was manufactured guilt, designed to keep me compliant and available for exploitation. Real guilt comes from harming others. Manufactured guilt comes from refusing to be harmed. I also learned that my story didn't make me weak or naive. It made me human. Love makes us vulnerable, and people who choose to exploit that vulnerability are responsible for their actions, not their victims. 6 months after leaving David's apartment, I felt strong enough to write him a letter. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I needed to say things that had been bottling up inside me since that horrible October night. The letter took me 3 weeks to write, going through draft after draft until I found the words that expressed my feelings without begging for anything in return. I didn't want his love back, his approval, or his acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I wanted him to know that I understood exactly what had happened, and that I was choosing myself over his definition of family. "Dear David," the letter began, "I am writing this not because I expect a response, but because I need to say these words clearly, once and for all. For 40 years, I believed that being a good mother meant saying yes to everything you needed, even when it cost me more than I could afford to give. I confused love with self-destruction, thinking that my worth as your mother was measured by how much I was willing to sacrifice. You taught me that I was wrong, not through your words, but through your actions when I finally tried to set boundaries. When I asked for basic respect and consideration, you responded by throwing me out of your home. When I tried to maintain my financial independence, you sabotaged my credit cards and lied to my bank about my mental competency. These actions showed me who you really are, and more importantly, they showed me who I need to be. I am no longer the mother who will fund your lifestyle while being treated like a burden. I am no longer the grandmother who will provide free childcare while being excluded from family photos. I am no longer the woman who will accept crumbs of affection in exchange for thousands of dollars and years of service. I am a 73-year-old woman who deserves to be treated with dignity. I am a person whose needs matter as much as anyone else's. I am someone who has friends who value my company, interests that bring me joy, and a future that belongs to me alone. You may tell people that I abandoned my family, but we both know the truth. You abandoned me first, emotionally and practically, years before I ever walked out of your apartment. The only difference is that I finally stopped pretending it wasn't happening. I don't hate you, David. Hate requires more energy than I'm willing to spend on people who have proven they don't value my presence in their lives. Instead, I'm indifferent to your opinion of me, and that's a kind of freedom I never expected to experience. I hope your new baby brings you joy. I hope your children grow up understanding that love is not transactional, that family means taking care of each other rather than exploiting each other. Most of all, I hope they never have to choose between their dignity and their family, the way I finally had to choose. I will not be available for babysitting, financial assistance, or emotional labor. I will not be attending family gatherings where I am tolerated rather than celebrated. I will not be responding to future attempts at contact unless they begin with a genuine apology and concrete changes in behavior. This is not a negotiation or an ultimatum. This is simply information about how my life will proceed from now on. Take care of yourself, David. Take care of your family. But understand that I am no longer responsible for taking care of you. With closure rather than love. Your mother, Margaret. I sealed the letter in an envelope and walked to the post office to mail it. The act of dropping it into the mailbox felt ceremonial, like I was posting notice of my independence to the world. Whatever response David might have would not change the fundamental truth I had finally accepted. I was worth more than they were willing to give, and I was strong enough to live with that knowledge. David's response came 2 weeks later, and it was exactly what I expected. A mixture of anger, manipulation, and self-pity designed to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. He accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. He claimed that I was having a breakdown and needed help. He threatened to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. Most cruelly, he said that Emma and Michael were devastated by my abandonment and cried every night asking why Grandma didn't love them anymore. Reading his letter, I felt the familiar stab of manufactured guilt trying to reassert itself. What if the children really were suffering? What if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving? What if family really was more important than my dignity? But then I remembered Dr. A. Williams's advice: trust your experience, not their words. Has this person's behavior demonstrated love and respect, or control and exploitation? David's letter contained no apology for the financial abuse, no acknowledgement of how he had treated me, no plan for making amends. Instead, it was another attempt to manipulate me into resuming my role as the family's unpaid servant and financial resource. I threw the letter away without responding. The real test of my newfound boundaries came 8 months after I had left David's apartment, when Emma called me directly. "Grandma?" Her voice was tearful and young, tugging at every maternal instinct I had left. "I miss you so much. Why can't you just come home?" My heart broke hearing the confusion and pain in my granddaughter's voice. She was 17 now, old enough to understand some of what had happened, but still young enough to believe that family problems could be solved with forgiveness and good intentions. "I miss you too, sweetheart," I told her honestly. "More than you could possibly know." "Then why won't you come back? Dad says you're mad at us, but I don't understand why. What did I do wrong?" The question devastated me. Emma genuinely didn't understand that this wasn't about her behavior or her brother's. It was about her parents' treatment of me as expendable and exploitable. I took a deep breath and tried to explain in terms a 17-year-old could understand. "Emma, this isn't your fault, and it's not about you or Michael. This is about how your parents treated me, and my decision that I deserve to be treated with respect." "But you're our grandmother," she said, as if that should solve everything. "Family is supposed to stick together." You're right that family is supposed to stick together, I agreed. But that means everyone in the family, not just some people taking care of others while getting nothing in return. When I lived with you, I was giving money, time, and energy to help your family, but I was being ignored, forgotten, and taken for granted in return. That's not what family is supposed to look like. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What if things were different? What if Dad apologized?" I considered that question carefully. "Emma, I would love nothing more than to have a real relationship with you and Michael. But that would require your parents to understand what they did wrong and to make genuine changes in how they treat me. An apology without changed behavior isn't really an apology. It's just words to get what they want." "Could you meet me for coffee sometime?" she asked. "Just you and me?" That question opened up possibilities I hadn't considered. Could I maintain a relationship with my grandchildren without subjecting myself to their parents' abuse? Could I love Emma and Michael while still protecting myself from David and Jennifer? "Yes," I said finally. "I would love that, but it would have to be separate from your parents, and you would have to understand that I'm not going to change my mind about living with your family or giving them money." "I understand," Emma said quickly. "I just want to see you." We met the following Saturday at a small cafe in Flushing, within walking distance of my apartment. Emma had grown taller and more mature since I'd last seen her, but she still had the same sweet smile she'd inherited from her grandfather. Sitting across from her in that sunny cafe, I felt a complicated mixture of joy and sadness. Joy at being reunited with this young woman I loved so much. Sadness that it had taken 8 months of separation to have an honest conversation. Emma told me about school, about her college applications, about the boy she was dating who played guitar and wanted to study environmental science. She told me that Michael was struggling with math and missed the way I used to help him with homework. She told me that her parents fought more now about money, and that sometimes she heard her mother crying in the kitchen late at night. "Dad says you were ungrateful," Emma said carefully, "but that doesn't match the grandmother I remember. You were always taking care of everyone." "That's exactly right," I said. "I was always taking care of everyone except myself. And eventually, I realized that wasn't sustainable or healthy." I told Emma about my new apartment, about Elena and my friends from Las Segundas, about the pottery classes I had started taking at the community center. I told her about therapy and how it had helped me understand that I could love my family without accepting mistreatment from them. "Are you happier now?" Emma asked. I considered the question. Was I happier? I was definitely lonelier in some ways. Holidays were quiet, and I missed the chaos of family dinners even when those dinners had been stressful. But I was also more peaceful, more in control of my own life, more confident in my worth as a human being. "I'm more myself now," I told Emma. "I'm not just someone's mother or grandmother or source of money. I'm Margaret, a whole person with my own interests and opinions and boundaries." I forgot that was allowed to be that person while I was so focused on being whatever everyone else needed me to be. Emma nodded like she understood more than I expected her to. "Sometimes I feel like that too," she admitted. "Like I have to be perfect all the time so Mom and Dad won't stress out more about money and stuff." That comment worried me. Was Emma already learning the same patterns that had trapped me for so many years? Was she sacrificing her own needs to manage other people's emotions? "Emma," I said carefully, "you don't have to take care of your parents' feelings. Their problems are not your responsibility to solve. But if I don't help keep the peace, everything gets worse. That's not your job, sweetheart. Children shouldn't have to manage their parents' emotions or financial stress. That's a burden that belongs to adults, not to you." We talked for 2 hours, and by the end of our conversation, I had made a decision. I would maintain relationships with Emma and Michael, but only on my terms. I would be available for coffee dates, phone calls, and emotional support, but I would not return to the role of unpaid family servant. I would offer love and guidance, but not money or physical labor. Most importantly, I would model for my grandchildren what it looked like to have boundaries, to respect yourself, to refuse to accept treatment that diminished your worth as a human being. Over the following months, I developed a routine that felt sustainable and fulfilling. Emma and I met for coffee every few weeks, sometimes with Michael joining us. I attended Emma's high school graduation, sitting separately from David and Jennifer, but cheering just as loudly when she walked across the stage. I sent birthday cards and Christmas presents, but I declined invitations to family gatherings where I would be expected to contribute financially or domestically while being treated as peripheral to the family unit. David made several more attempts to reestablish contact, always when he needed something. When Jennifer had complications during her pregnancy and they needed someone to watch Emma and Michael, when their car broke down and they needed money for repairs, when the new baby was born and they wanted help with childcare. Each time, I said no kindly but firmly. I had learned that no was a complete sentence, requiring no justification or elaborate explanation. My reasons for maintaining boundaries were valid whether David understood them or not. The hardest moment came when Jennifer called me directly, crying about how overwhelming it was to have 3 children and asking if I could just help out for a few weeks after the baby was born. I know things got complicated before, Jennifer said, but we really need family support right now. I understand that having a new baby is overwhelming, I replied, but I'm not available to provide childcare or financial support. There are professional services available if you need help, and I'm sure you'll figure out what works best for your family. You're really going to abandon your own grandchildren? Jennifer asked, her tears turning to anger when manipulation didn't work. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said calmly. I'm maintaining healthy boundaries that protect my well-being while still loving my grandchildren from a distance. Those are not the same thing. Jennifer hung up on me, and I felt sad but not guilty. Sad because I wished things could be different, but not guilty because I knew I was protecting myself from people who had proven they would exploit my love if given the opportunity. A year and a half after leaving David's apartment, I received an unexpected phone call that would test everything I had learned about boundaries and self-respect. "Is this Margaret Walsh?" the voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Dr. Patricia Rodriguez from Queens General Hospital. Your son David Walsh has been in a serious car accident. He's listed you as his emergency contact, and we need family members to come to the hospital immediately." My first instinct was panic. Despite everything that had happened between us, David was still my child, and the thought of losing him sent adrenaline coursing through my system. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, ready to take 3 buses to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. But then I stopped. Something about the phone call felt wrong. Dr. Rodriguez had said that David listed me as his emergency contact, but that didn't make sense. David had my old phone number, which had been disconnected for over a year. How would the hospital have reached me if I was truly his emergency contact? I called the hospital directly and asked to speak with Dr. Rodriguez. No such doctor worked there. I asked if David Walsh had been admitted as a patient. He had not. The call had been fake, probably orchestrated by David or Jennifer to manipulate me into breaking my boundaries under the guise of a family emergency. The cruelty of using a fake medical crisis to try to regain control over me was breathtaking, but it also confirmed that I had made the right decision in cutting off contact. People who truly love and respect you don't lie about medical emergencies to manipulate your emotions. That incident clarified something important for me. My commitment to protecting myself needed to be absolute, not conditional on whether David was having a good day or a crisis. Manipulation is manipulation, whether it comes wrapped in birthday cards, graduation invitations, or fake emergency phone calls. I blocked David's phone number and changed mine again, giving the new number only to Emma, Michael, Elena, and a few close friends. I also contacted my lawyer to document the fake emergency call, adding it to the growing file of evidence about the emotional manipulation I had endured. But the incident also did something else. It freed me completely from any lingering guilt about my decision to prioritize my own well-being over my family's convenience. If David was willing to lie about being in a car accident to try to manipulate me into resuming contact, then he had lost any right to consideration or compassion from me. I was finally completely free. The second year of my independence was when I truly began to flourish. I had moved beyond just surviving without my family's toxicity. I was actively building a life that brought me joy and purpose. I enrolled in a pottery class at the Queen's Museum, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for when my days were consumed with serving other people's needs. Working with clay turned out to be incredibly therapeutic. There's something about shaping raw earth into something beautiful and useful that felt like a metaphor for what I was doing with my own life. My instructor, a woman named Sarah who was probably 40 years younger than me but infinitely patient with my shaking hands, taught me that pottery requires both strength and gentleness. You have to be firm enough to shape the clay, but gentle enough not to collapse it. Too much pressure and you destroy your creation. Too little and nothing takes shape. I realized that the same principle applied to boundaries. Setting limits with family required firmness without cruelty, strength without brutality. I had to be strong enough to protect myself, but gentle enough to maintain my own humanity in the process. My pottery became a source of pride in a way I hadn't experienced since my children were small. Each bowl, mug, and vase was something I had created with my own hands, shaped according to my own vision, useful and beautiful in its own right. Friends like Elena would admire my work and ask if they could have pieces for their own homes, making me feel valued for my creativity rather than just my utility. I also started volunteering at a local senior center, helping other elderly people navigate the social services system and apply for benefits they deserved but didn't know how to access. My years of experience in healthcare had given me knowledge about Medicare, Medicaid, and other programs that many of my peers desperately needed, but found too complicated to understand. Working with other seniors also exposed me to the full spectrum of family relationships in old age. There was Mrs. Chen, whose 3 adult children took turns caring for her and made sure she never felt like a burden. There was Mr. Rodriguez, whose son called him every day just to check in and ask about his Father's Day. There was Mrs. Johnson, whose daughter had moved her elderly mother into her own home and actually made her feel welcome and valued. These examples showed me that my experience with David wasn't universal or inevitable. Some adult children really do honor their parents and treat aging as an opportunity to give back, rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Some families understand that caring for elderly parents is both a privilege and a responsibility, not a favor that justifies exploitation. Seeing healthy family relationships helped me stop wondering if I had been too harsh with David and Jennifer. I hadn't asked for anything extraordinary, just basic respect, financial honesty, and inclusion in the family I was supporting. The fact that other families found ways to provide these things proved that my expectations had been reasonable, not excessive. One afternoon while volunteering, I met a woman named Dorothy, whose story made me grateful for my own journey toward independence, difficult as it had been. Dorothy was 81 years old and had been living with her daughter's family for 5 years. Like me, she contributed financially to the household and provided childcare for her grandchildren. Unlike me, she had never found the courage to leave. "My daughter Sarah works so hard," Dorothy told me, her voice full of the exhaustion I remembered from my own days of making excuses for David's behavior. "She has 3 children and a mortgage, and her husband lost his job last year. I know she doesn't mean to be short with me. She's just stressed." Dorothy's daughter required her to pay $800 a month in rent for a small bedroom, plus additional money for food and utilities. Dorothy was also expected to pick up the children from school every day, cook dinner 3 nights a week, and babysit whenever Sarah wanted to go out. But I'm family, Dorothy would say whenever I gently suggested that she was being taken advantage of. This is what family does for each other. Does Sarah do things for you? I asked. Or is the helping all one-directional? Dorothy thought about that question for a long time. She lets me live in her house, she said finally. You pay rent for that room, I pointed out. And you work to earn your keep on top of that rent. You're not being helped. You're being employed as a live-in nanny and housekeeper who pays for the privilege of working. Dorothy's situation was so similar to my own that talking with her felt like looking back at my former self. She was trapped by the same sense of obligation, the same fear of abandonment, the same desperate hope that sacrificing enough would eventually earn her the love and respect she deserved. But Dorothy also helped me see how far I had come. 2 years earlier, I would have been making the same excuses for David that Dorothy made for Sarah. I would have been explaining away the exploitation, justifying the treatment, convincing myself that being used was better than being alone. Now I could see clearly that Dorothy deserved better, just as I had deserved better. I could offer her resources and support without getting drawn back into the mindset that had kept me trapped for so long. I gave Dorothy my lawyer's contact information and the phone number for Elder Protective Services. I told her about transitional housing programs and senior support groups. Most importantly, I told her that she was worth more than her daughter was willing to give her, and that it was never too late to choose herself over people who exploited her kindness. Dorothy was afraid to make changes, and I understood that fear. Change is terrifying when you're older and feel like your options are limited. But staying in harmful situations because you're afraid of the unknown isn't really living. It's just surviving, and survival isn't enough when you could have dignity instead. My 3rd year of independence brought unexpected challenges that tested my resolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. Emma started her freshman year at college, and the financial stress on David and Jennifer's household increased dramatically. College tuition, even at a state school, was expensive, and Emma qualified for financial aid, but still needed help with room and board, textbooks, and other expenses. David called me from a number I didn't recognize, catching me off guard when I answered the phone. "Mom," he said, his voice humble in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. "I know we've had our differences, but Emma is your granddaughter. She needs help with college expenses, and I'm asking you to consider contributing to her education." The request was reasonable on its surface. Emma was a good student who deserved educational opportunities, and I loved her deeply. I also had money in savings that could help with her college costs, without creating financial hardship for me. But I also knew that any financial contribution would be seen as an opening for renewed exploitation. David's tone was respectful in this conversation because he needed something, but nothing in his approach suggested that he had genuinely examined his past behavior or committed to changing it. "Emma is welcome to come talk with me about college funding," I told David. "But any financial assistance I provide will come with conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "I'll pay money directly to the school for tuition and fees. I won't give cash to her or to you. I'll require receipts for any expenses I cover, and this arrangement will be between Emma and me. No family meetings, no negotiations with you and Jennifer, no expectations that helping Emma means I'm available for other financial requests." David was quiet for a moment. "That seems unnecessarily complicated." "It seems necessarily protective," I corrected. "I'm willing to help Emma because I love her and support her education. I'm not willing to help your household finances or to be drawn back into financial exploitation." "You really think that little of us?" David said, his respectful tone beginning to slip. "I think that little of your track record," I replied. "People earn trust through consistent, respectful behavior over time. You haven't done that work." David hung up, and I felt confident that I had handled the conversation appropriately. I was willing to help Emma in ways that protected both of us, but I wasn't willing to compromise my boundaries just because the request seemed reasonable. Emma called me that evening, crying about the conversation she'd had with her father. Dad says you won't help with college because you're still mad at him, she sobbed. But this isn't about him. It's about my education. You're absolutely right that your education isn't about your father, I agreed. That's why I want to help you directly, without involving him in the process. I explained to Emma the same conditions I had outlined to David. I was willing to pay her tuition bills directly, to buy her textbooks, to send her money for necessary expenses like laptop computers and lab fees. But I wouldn't give her family cash that could be redirected to other purposes, and I wouldn't resume the role of family ATM just because one of them needed something. Why does it have to be so complicated? Emma asked, echoing her father's words. Because simple arrangements got me exploited in the past, I said honestly. I love you enough to help you succeed in college, but I love myself enough to do it in a way that protects me from being taken advantage of. Emma didn't like the restrictions, but she agreed to them. Over the next 4 years, I paid thousands of dollars directly to her college for tuition and fees. I bought her textbooks online and had them shipped to her dorm. I sent her care packages and money for legitimate educational expenses, always with receipts and documentation. Most importantly, I maintained a loving relationship with Emma throughout her college years without being drawn back into financial exploitation by her parents. She would visit me during school breaks, and we would spend hours talking about her classes, her friends, her plans for the future. Emma's college graduation was one of the proudest moments of my life. Sitting in the auditorium watching her walk across the stage, I felt vindicated in my decision to set boundaries that protected both of us. I had been able to contribute to her education without sacrificing my financial security or emotional well-being. David and Jennifer were at the graduation, of course, but we didn't interact beyond polite nods of acknowledgement. That distance felt appropriate rather than painful. I was there for Emma, not for them, and they no longer had the power to make me feel guilty for prioritizing my own well-being. After the ceremony, Emma introduced me to her boyfriend, Jake, who was graduating with a degree in environmental science, just as she had told me years earlier when we first started meeting for coffee. Jake was funny and kind, and clearly adored Emma. Most importantly, he treated her as an equal partner rather than a convenience or resource. Your grandmother is amazing, Jake told Emma while I was standing right there. She raised money to help you graduate without debt, and she never made you feel guilty about it. That's real love. Emma smiled and hugged me. She taught me what healthy boundaries look like, she said. I'm still learning, but I understand now why she had to protect herself from my parents. That comment filled me with pride and sadness simultaneously. Pride, because Emma had learned from my example that love doesn't require self-destruction. Sadness, because she had needed to learn that lesson due to her parents' behavior, rather than from their positive example. But Emma's growth also gave me hope. The cycle of exploitation that had defined my relationship with David didn't have to define her relationships with her own future family. She had seen what healthy boundaries looked like and understood their value. My 4th year of independence brought news that tested my emotional equilibrium in unexpected ways. Michael, now 18, was accepted to community college, but was struggling academically and socially. According to Emma, he had started drinking heavily and had gotten into trouble with the police for vandalism. David and Jennifer were overwhelmed trying to manage his behavior while also caring for their youngest child, who was now 3 years old. Emma asked if I would consider reaching out to Michael, maybe offering the kind of guidance and support that had helped her succeed in college. He asks about you sometimes, Emma told me during one of our coffee dates. I think he's angry that you're not around, but he's also confused about why you left. He was younger when everything happened, and I don't think he really understood what was going on. I had thought about Michael often over the past 4 years, wondering how he was coping with the family dynamics that had driven me away. He had been only 14 when I left, still a child trying to make sense of adult problems. Unlike Emma, who had matured enough to understand my perspective, Michael might still be processing my departure as abandonment rather than self-protection. I'm willing to talk with Michael, I told Emma. But I need to know that he genuinely wants a relationship with me, not that his parents are trying to use him to reestablish contact for their own purposes. Emma assured me that Michael had been asking about me independently, without prompting from David or Jennifer. In fact, she said, Michael's relationship with his parents had become quite strained as he got older and began to see their behavior more critically. Michael and I met for lunch at a diner near his college, a neutral location where we could talk without family interference. He had grown tall and lanky, with David's dark hair but gentler eyes that reminded me of my late husband. "I've been mad at you," Michael said without preamble once we had ordered our food. "Emma says I shouldn't be, but I felt like you just disappeared from my life without explaining anything." "You have every right to be angry," I told him. "From your perspective, your grandmother left suddenly and then refused to come back no matter what happened with the family. That would hurt anyone." Michael looked surprised that I had validated his feelings rather than defending my actions. "So, why did you leave?" I spent the next hour explaining to Michael the same things I had eventually explained to Emma: the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation, the constant feeling of being tolerated rather than valued. I told him about the fake emergency phone call and my decision to prioritize my own well-being over other people's convenience. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you and Emma," I concluded. "I left because I couldn't be a healthy presence in your lives while I was being treated as disposable by your parents." Michael listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification, but generally just absorbing what I was telling him. When I finished, he sat quietly for several minutes. "I think I get it now," he said finally. "Dad does treat you like crap. I mean, he treats me like crap too, but I figured that was just normal family stuff." "It's not normal, and it's not okay," I told Michael. "Not for you, not for me, not for anyone." Michael told me about his struggles in college, about feeling pressure to succeed academically while dealing with his father's criticism and his mother's anxiety about money. He told me about the drinking and the trouble with police, acknowledging that he was making poor choices but feeling like he didn't know how to make better ones. "Everyone expects me to have my life figured out," Michael said, "but I feel like I'm drowning most of the time." I recognized that feeling, that sense of being overwhelmed by other people's expectations while receiving no support or guidance for meeting them. "What would help you feel less like you're drowning?" I asked. Michael shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe having someone who actually cares about what I want instead of what they need from me." That comment broke my heart and also filled it. Broke it because Michael was experiencing the same emotional neglect that had driven me away from his family. Filled it because he was asking for the kind of relationship I wanted to have with him, one based on mutual care and respect rather than obligation and exploitation. "I care about what you want," I told him. "And I'm willing to be part of your support system if you want that. But it would have to be separate from your parents, the same way my relationship with Emma exists separately from them." Michael nodded. "I think I'd like that." Over the following months, Michael and I developed our own relationship independent of the rest of the family. Like Emma, he would visit me occasionally, and we would talk about his classes, his struggles, his goals for the future. Unlike with Emma, I didn't provide financial support. Michael's college was much less expensive, and he was receiving enough financial aid to cover his costs, but I provided emotional support and practical guidance. I helped Michael develop better study habits and time management skills. I listened when he needed to vent about family stress or academic pressure. Most importantly, I modeled the same healthy boundaries with him that I had modeled for Emma, showing both of my grandchildren what it looked like to support someone you love without sacrificing your own well-being. Michael's grades improved, and the drinking and police troubles stopped. He started talking about transferring to a 4-year college and majoring in social work, inspired by the volunteer work I had been doing with seniors. "I want to help people who are stuck in bad situations," he told me one afternoon while we were walking through Flushing Meadows Park. "Like, you help old people figure out how to get services they need." "That's meaningful work," I told him. "Just make sure you're helping from a position of strength, not sacrificing yourself to save other people." Michael smiled. "Emma says you say that a lot, about not sacrificing yourself for other people." "It's an important lesson," I replied. "One I learned too late in my own life." Better late than never, though, right? Absolutely. My relationships with Emma and Michael had become sources of joy and pride in my life. I had managed to maintain loving connections with my grandchildren while protecting myself from their parents' toxicity. Emma had graduated college without debt and was building a healthy relationship with someone who respected her. Michael was turning his life around and developing the skills he needed to be successful both academically and personally. Most importantly, both Emma and Michael had learned from my example that love doesn't require accepting mistreatment, and that choosing yourself over dysfunctional family dynamics isn't selfish. It's necessary for everyone's well-being. But my sense of peace would be tested one more time in a way I never saw coming. 5 years after leaving David's apartment, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. This time, I had learned to verify emergency claims before reacting, so I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Walsh? This is Rebecca Martinez from Queens General Hospital. I'm calling about Jennifer Walsh, who was admitted earlier today following a car accident. She's listed you as her emergency contact." My first thought was skepticism. David and Jennifer had tried the fake emergency call before. But something about this caller sounded different, more professional and specific. "Can you hold on while I verify this call by contacting the hospital directly?" I asked. "Of course," Rebecca replied. "You can reach me at extension 4127. I hung up and called Queens General myself. Rebecca Martinez was indeed a social worker there, and Jennifer Walsh was indeed a patient recovering from injuries sustained in a car accident that morning. The accident had been serious but not life-threatening. Jennifer had several broken bones and would need surgery, followed by weeks of recovery. The social worker was calling because Jennifer couldn't care for her 3-year-old son during her hospitalization and recovery period, and David was apparently not available to provide full-time childcare. "Mrs. Walsh," Rebecca continued when I called back, "I need to ask, are you willing and able to provide temporary care for your grandson during his mother's recovery?" The request was reasonable and straightforward. A 3-year-old needed care, and I was family. Under normal circumstances, this would be exactly the kind of situation where families rally around each other without question. But these weren't normal circumstances. This was David and Jennifer, who had kicked me out of their home, tried to sabotage my credit cards, lied to banks about my mental competency, and made a fake emergency call to manipulate me into breaking my boundaries. "I need more information before I can answer that," I told Rebecca. "Where is David, and why isn't he able to care for his own child?" Rebecca explained that David had been arrested the previous week on charges related to financial fraud and was currently in jail awaiting trial. Apparently, the same skills he had used to exploit my finances had been applied to other scams, and he had finally been caught. Jennifer had been trying to manage work and childcare alone when the accident happened. She had no other family in the area, and their friends were either unwilling or unable to take responsibility for a toddler for several weeks. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. "The child would go into temporary foster care," Rebecca replied matter-of-factly. "We have good foster families available, but it would mean placement with strangers rather than family." I felt the familiar weight of manufactured guilt trying to settle on my shoulders. A 3-year-old boy, my grandson, David's son, would go to strangers because I was unwilling to help his mother, who was lying in a hospital bed with broken bones. But then I remembered Dr. Williams's guidance. Trust your experience, not their words or circumstances. David and Jennifer had demonstrated through their actions that they viewed me as a resource to be exploited rather than a family member to be respected. Jennifer being injured and David being in jail didn't change that fundamental dynamic. "I'm not able to provide childcare," I told Rebecca, "but I'm willing to pay for professional care while Jennifer recovers." "What kind of professional care?" "I could pay for a live-in nanny or for extended stay daycare costs. I could cover the expenses that would allow Jennifer to hire help without requiring me to personally provide labor." Rebecca said she would discuss the option with Jennifer and call me back. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Jennifer calling from her hospital bed. "Margaret," she said, her voice weak but determined. "I know we've had our problems, but Christopher is your grandson. He needs family right now, not strangers." Christopher. I had forgotten they named the baby Christopher. He would be 3.5 now, probably walking and talking, beginning to develop his own personality. A little boy who was innocent of his parents' bad behavior toward me. "I understand that Christopher needs care," I said carefully. "I'm willing to pay for that care, but I'm not willing to provide it personally." "Why?" Jennifer asked, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely confused rather than manipulative. "He's just a baby. He doesn't understand why his grandmother won't help him." "Because the last time I provided personal care in your household, I was exploited financially and emotionally mistreated," I said bluntly. "Because your husband tried to sabotage my credit cards and lied to my bank about my mental competency. Because you both kicked me out onto the street and then tried to manipulate me with fake emergency calls." "That wasn't about Christopher," Jennifer said. "No, it wasn't," I agreed. "It was about how his parents treat people they're supposed to love. And I'm not willing to put myself back in that position, even for a child I love." "So you'll let him go to foster care rather than take care of him yourself?" "I'll pay for professional care so he doesn't have to go to foster care," I corrected. "That's help without self-sacrifice." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "The nanny would be expensive." "I can afford it." "For how long?" "As long as you need to recover and David needs to resolve his legal situation." Jennifer's voice got smaller. "We can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm offering to pay for Christopher's care as a gift, with no expectation of reimbursement." "But you won't take care of him yourself?" "No, I won't." Jennifer started crying then. The kind of exhausted, overwhelmed crying that comes from being injured, alone, and facing problems you can't solve. Despite everything that had happened between us, I felt sorry for her. She was hurt and scared, and dealing with a husband in jail and a toddler who needed care she couldn't provide. But sympathy didn't require self-sacrifice. I could feel sorry for Jennifer's situation without compromising the boundaries that protected my well-being. "Jennifer," I said gently, "I'm offering to spend thousands of dollars to make sure Christopher is cared for by qualified professionals. That's not abandonment. That's help within my limits." "It's not the same as family," she said. "You're right, it's not," I agreed. "Family would be based on mutual respect and consideration. Family would remember my birthday and not sell my medication. Family would treat my financial contributions as gifts to be appreciated, rather than expectations to be demanded. What you're asking for isn't actually family. It's free labor from someone you've mistreated." Jennifer didn't have an answer for that. I hired a professional nanny through an agency, paying for 6 weeks of live-in care while Jennifer recovered from her surgery. The nanny, Maria, was experienced with young children and came with excellent references. She moved into David and Jennifer's apartment and took complete responsibility for Christopher's daily care, allowing Jennifer to rest and heal without worrying about her son's needs. The arrangement cost me nearly $5,000, but it achieved what I needed it to achieve. Christopher was cared for by someone competent and kind. Jennifer got the help she needed to recover, and I maintained the boundaries that protected my emotional and financial well-being. Emma and Michael were both impressed and confused by my decision. "I don't understand why you won't just take care of Christopher yourself," Emma said during one of our coffee meetings. "You love kids, and you're great with them." "Because taking care of Christopher myself would require me to move back into your parents' apartment and resume the role of unpaid family servant," I explained. "It would mean sacrificing my independence and well-being for other people's convenience." "But it's only temporary," Michael pointed out. "Just until Jennifer gets better." "That's what I thought when I moved into their apartment 3 years ago," I replied. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're dealing with people who don't respect boundaries. Both Emma and Michael struggled to understand why I was willing to spend thousands of dollars on professional childcare, but not willing to provide the care myself for free. To them, my decision seemed illogical and unnecessarily expensive. But to me, the decision was about more than money or logic. It was about proving to myself that I could love my family without sacrificing my dignity, that I could help in crisis situations without returning to patterns of exploitation, that my boundaries were strong enough to withstand even the most emotionally manipulative circumstances. The nanny arrangement worked beautifully. Maria sent me photos of Christopher playing in the park and learning to ride a tricycle. Jennifer's recovery progressed smoothly, and she was able to return to work part-time after 6 weeks. Most importantly, I had managed to meet a genuine family need without compromising my own well-being. David was eventually sentenced to 18 months in prison for financial fraud. The news didn't give me any satisfaction. I took no pleasure in his suffering. But it did confirm that my instincts about his character had been correct. Someone who would exploit his own mother's finances was certainly capable of exploiting strangers as well. Jennifer filed for divorce while David was in prison, finally acknowledging what I had tried to tell her years earlier. David's problems were not temporary stress or situational difficulties, but fundamental character flaws that made him unsuitable as a partner or parent. Emma and Michael maintained minimal contact with their father after his release from prison, continuing to prioritize their relationships with me and with each other. Christopher, now 5 years old, occasionally visited me with Jennifer's permission, though Jennifer and I maintained polite but distant boundaries. The little boy was sweet and curious, with David's dark hair and his grandfather's gentle eyes. He called me Grandma Margaret, and seemed to enjoy our visits, but I was careful to maintain appropriate limits on my involvement in his care and Jennifer's life. Jennifer had learned, through necessity and hardship, to manage her household and finances without exploiting others. David's absence and legal troubles had forced her to develop independence and responsibility. She was not the same woman who had participated in my exploitation years earlier, and I respected the growth she had achieved while maintaining my boundaries about future involvement. 6 years after leaving David's apartment, I had created a life that felt both meaningful and sustainable. My relationship with Elena continued to be a source of daily joy and support. Las Segundas had grown from our initial group of 4 women to more than 20, meeting weekly to share resources, celebrate victories, and support each other through challenges. I had become something of a mentor in the group, helping newer members navigate the process of setting boundaries with exploitative family members and accessing social services that supported independent living for seniors. My own experience had given me credibility and wisdom that I could share with others facing similar struggles. My pottery had evolved from a hobby to a small business. Elena and I sold our work at local craft fairs and farmers markets, donating the proceeds to programs that supported elder abuse victims. Creating beautiful objects with my own hands and using them to help others felt like a perfect circle of purpose and meaning. Most importantly, I had learned to love myself enough to protect myself, to value my own needs enough to meet them, to respect my own boundaries enough to maintain them even under pressure. The woman who had woken up in that homeless shelter with nothing but a plastic bag of belongings had been replaced by a woman with her own apartment, her own income, her own friendships, her own interests, and her own power to make decisions about her life. I still missed the family I had tried so hard to create and maintain. I still felt sadness about the relationships that could have been if David and Jennifer had chosen respect over exploitation. But I no longer felt guilty about choosing dignity over dysfunction, self-respect over self-sacrifice. On quiet evenings, I would sit on my small balcony with a glass of wine and watch the sunset over Queens. The city spread out before me, millions of people living their own complicated lives, making their own difficult choices about family and love and boundaries and respect. Sometimes Elena would join me, bringing her own glass of wine and her own stories of the day. We would talk about our grandchildren, our pottery, our plans for the weekend. We would share comfortable silence, two women who had learned that loneliness and solitude were different things, that being alone was not the same as being abandoned. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Elena asked me one evening as we watched the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple. I considered the question. Did I regret leaving? Did I regret choosing myself over family harmony, independence over inclusion, dignity over duty? "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that David and Jennifer weren't capable of treating me with basic respect and honesty. I regret that love wasn't enough to create healthy relationships." "But do you regret the choice itself?" "No," I said without hesitation. "I regret that I waited so long to make it." Elena nodded. "I think about leaving my son's house sometimes. When he asks for money, I don't have. Or when his wife makes comments about my cooking smells. But I'm scared of ending up alone." "You wouldn't be alone," I told her. "You'd be independent. There's a difference." "How do you know the difference?" "Alone means nobody cares about you," I said. "Independent means you care about yourself enough to protect yourself from people who don't care about you properly." Elena smiled. "You should put that on a greeting card." We sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the city. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of families in other apartments, children laughing, parents calling, the ordinary chaos of people who had figured out how to love each other without destroying each other in the process. Those sounds no longer made me sad. They reminded me that healthy families existed, that love could coexist with respect, that it was possible to take care of people without sacrificing yourself in the process. I had not given up on love or family. I had given up on accepting substitutes for love and family. I had learned to recognize the difference between genuine care and emotional manipulation, between temporary inconvenience and permanent pattern, between helping someone and enabling someone. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to participate in their dysfunction. By setting boundaries with David and Jennifer, I had forced them to face the consequences of their choices rather than enabling them to continue exploiting others. David's legal troubles might have been avoided if he had learned earlier in life that actions have consequences, that people are not resources to be exploited, that relationships require mutual respect and consideration. My willingness to be his perpetual safety net had actually harmed him by preventing him from developing the character and skills necessary for healthy adult relationships. Jennifer's growth into independence and responsibility had only happened after I stopped providing the financial and emotional support that allowed her to avoid growing up. My sacrifice had actually hindered her development rather than helping it. Emma and Michael had learned about healthy boundaries and self-respect by watching me model them, something they never would have learned if I had continued accepting mistreatment in the name of family loyalty. Even Christopher was better off because I had insisted on professional care rather than resumed my role as family servant. He had learned that care and love came from multiple sources, not just family members who sacrificed themselves for others. In trying to save my family by sacrificing myself, I had actually been enabling their worst impulses and preventing their growth. In choosing to save myself instead, I had created opportunities for all of us to become healthier, more independent, more capable people. This realization brought me peace in a way I hadn't expected. My choice to leave hadn't been selfish or cruel. It had been necessary and ultimately loving. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for people you love is to stop making it easy for them to treat you badly. 7 years after that cold October morning when I woke up with nothing but the clothes on my back and a plastic bag in my hand, I woke up in my own apartment, in my own bed, surrounded by the life I had chosen and built for myself. I made coffee in a mug I had created in pottery class, checking my phone for messages from Emma about her new job and Michael about his upcoming graduation from social work school. Elena had sent me photos of her latest craft project, and several members of Las Segundas had confirmed their attendance at our weekly meeting. My calendar was full but not overwhelming. Volunteer shift at the senior center, pottery class, coffee date with Emma, dinner with Elena and some other neighbors. Activities I had chosen because they brought me joy and purpose, not because anyone expected or demanded them from me. My bank account was healthy, managed entirely by me according to my own priorities and values. My apartment was decorated with my own pottery and artwork, furnished according to my own taste, maintained according to my own standards. Most importantly, my relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The people in my life wanted me around because they enjoyed my company, not because I provided them with money or labor or convenience. Standing on my balcony with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over Queens, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete contentment with my own life. Not because it was perfect or easy or impressive to others, but because it was mine. I had learned that you don't have to be related to someone to love them genuinely, and that being related to someone doesn't guarantee they will love you appropriately. I had learned that family is what you create through mutual care and respect, not what you're assigned through accident of birth. I had learned that growing older doesn't have to mean becoming invisible, irrelevant, or disposable. That wisdom and experience are valuable resources that deserve to be respected rather than exploited. That seniors have the same right as anyone else to be treated with dignity and kindness. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand respect, to build the life you deserve rather than accepting the life others are willing to give you. If you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in my experience, I want you to know that you deserve better than you're getting. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve to have your contributions acknowledged and appreciated rather than taken for granted. You deserve to wake up in the morning feeling peaceful rather than anxious about what will be demanded of you that day. You deserve to have relationships that energize and sustain you rather than drain and deplete you. You deserve to be treated as a whole person with your own needs, interests, and boundaries, not just as a resource for other people's convenience. And you deserve to know that choosing yourself over people who mistreat you is not selfish. It's necessary. It's not giving up on family. It's refusing to accept substitutes for real family. It's not being cruel. It's being kind to yourself for once. Change is possible at any age, in any circumstance. Independence is possible even when you feel trapped by obligation and fear. Dignity is possible even when you've accepted indignity for years or decades. The first step is believing that you deserve better. The second step is asking for it. The third step is protecting it once you've found it. I'm 79 years old now, and these have been the best years of my life. Not because they've been easy, change is never easy, but because they've been mine. Have you ever lived something similar to my story, or known someone who has? Have you ever felt torn between family loyalty and self-respect, between love and exploitation? Tell me in the comments below. Your experience matters, and sharing it might help someone else who's struggling with the same decisions I faced. If this story resonated with you, please click the like button and subscribe to this channel. Sharing these stories helps them reach people who need to hear them, People who might be sitting in their own versions of that queen's apartment, wondering if they deserve better. Because you do deserve better. You deserve love that doesn't cost everything you have to give. You deserve respect that doesn't require you to sacrifice your dignity. You deserve relationships that celebrate you for who you are, not what you can provide. And it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my heart. Until next time, remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how well you protect and cherish the precious person you are.